The icy water was pulling him under for the third time. Sarah Mitchell watched in horror as the tiny grizzly cub's head disappeared beneath the churning rapids of the Salmon River. This wasn't supposed to happen. What started as a peaceful morning hike in Idaho's wilderness had turned into a life-or-death situation that would change everything she thought she knew about wild animals. Before we dive into this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications to catch more heartwarming stories like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Sarah had less than 30 seconds to make a decision that could cost her everything. The water was freezing, the current was deadly, and somewhere in these mountains a 400-pound mother grizzly was looking for her baby. But what happened after Sarah made her choice? What she discovered about this little cub would shock wildlife experts and challenge everything we know about the bond between humans and wild animals. This is a story of courage, of impossible odds, and of a connection that defied nature itself. Let me take you back to where this all began. Sarah Mitchell wasn't your typical wildlife enthusiast. A 34-year-old emergency room nurse from Boise, she'd seen her share of trauma and crisis. But nothing in her medical training had prepared her for what she'd encounter on that crisp September morning in the Sawtooth National Forest. Sarah had been hiking alone, something she'd done hundreds of times before. The trails of central Idaho were her sanctuary, the place where she went to find peace after long shifts at the hospital. She knew these mountains like the back of her hand, respected their dangers, and always followed the rules about wildlife encounters. Keep your distance, never approach, never feed, never interfere. These weren't just guidelines, they were survival rules in grizzly country. The morning had started perfectly. A light frost painted the meadows silver, and the aspens were just beginning their autumn transformation. Sarah had packed light, just water, some trail mix, and her camera. She was planning a simple day hike to Clear Lake, a route she'd taken dozens of times before. But nature had other plans. It was around 10 a.m. when Sarah heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold. Not the deep growl of an adult bear, but something else, something desperate and high-pitched. A cry that seemed to echo off the canyon walls. She froze on the trail, every instinct telling her to turn around. In grizzly country, unusual sounds meant danger. But this wasn't the sound of an aggressive bear. This was the sound of something in distress. Following the cries, Sarah carefully made her way through thick brush toward the river. The Salmon River was running high from recent rains, its normally gentle current transformed into a raging torrent of white water and debris. And there, struggling against rocks and fallen logs about 50 feet downstream, was a sight that broke her heart. A grizzly cub, probably no more than 6 months old, was trapped in the rapids. The little bear was barely keeping his head above water, his tiny paws frantically trying to grip the slippery rocks. Every few seconds, the current would drag him under, and Sarah would hold her breath until his small head popped back up, gasping and crying. Sarah's nurse training kicked in immediately. This wasn't just an animal in distress, this was a baby, and he was dying. But she also knew the reality of the situation. This cub had a mother somewhere nearby, a mother who would kill to protect her baby, a mother who might see Sarah as a threat, not a rescuer. Sarah crouched behind a boulder, her mind racing. She pulled out her phone, no signal. She was alone, 3 miles from the nearest trail junction, with no way to call for help. Even if she could reach park rangers, by the time they arrived, it would be too late. The cub was weakening. His cries were becoming fainter, his struggles less coordinated. The icy mountain water was stealing his strength with every passing second. Sarah closed her eyes and thought of all the children she'd treated in the ER. The car accident victims, the drowning cases, the hypothermia patients. She'd sworn an oath to save lives. Did that oath end at humans? When she opened her eyes, the decision was made. Sarah quickly stripped off her hiking boots and jacket. The water was going to be shockingly cold, but she was a strong swimmer and she had experience with water rescues from her hospital training. She found a sturdy branch and began working her way downstream, staying parallel to the riverbank until she was positioned just below where the current would carry the cub. The little grizzly saw her coming. For a moment their eyes met across the churning water. Sarah expected to see fear, but what she saw instead was something that haunts her to this day: recognition, understanding, hope. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear her over the roar of the water. "I'm coming." Sarah waded into the river and the cold hit her like a physical blow. The water was so cold it felt like needles against her skin. The current was stronger than she'd expected, immediately pulling at her legs, trying to drag her downstream. She positioned herself between two large rocks, using the branch to extend her reach. The cub was coming closer, tumbling helplessly in the white water. Come on," she muttered, timing the current, calculating angles like she was catching a child falling from a hospital gurney. The first attempt missed. The cub swept past her, his small paw actually brushing against the branch before the current yanked him away. Her heart sank. She'd only have one more chance before the river carried him into a section of rapids that would be impossible to survive. She repositioned herself further downstream, waist deep now in water so cold her legs were going numb. The cub was approaching again, weaker now, barely able to keep his head up. This time, Sarah didn't wait for him to come to her. She lunged forward, extending the branch like a lifeline. The cub's paw connected, and for a terrifying moment, Sarah thought the current would rip them both away. But then, something amazing happened. The little grizzly, driven by pure survival instinct, wrapped both front paws around the branch and held on with everything he had left. Sarah pulled with every ounce of strength in her body, fighting against the current that wanted to claim them both. Step by agonizing step, she worked her way back to shore, the exhausted cub clinging to the branch like his life depended on it. Because it did. When she finally dragged him onto the rocky shore, they both collapsed. The cub was unconscious, his small body limp and cold. Sarah's nurse training took over immediately. And then something unprecedented happened. As the cub began to warm up and regain consciousness, instead of panicking or trying to flee, he did something that defied every wildlife expert's understanding of bear behavior. He crawled closer to Sarah. The little grizzly, weak and disoriented, actually sought comfort from his human rescuer. He pressed his small body against her chest, listening to her heartbeat, drawing warmth from her presence. "I couldn't believe it," Sarah would later tell wildlife biologists. "He was treating me like his mother." For 20 minutes, Sarah sat on that riverbank with a wild grizzly cub sleeping peacefully in her arms. She knew she should move. The mother could return at any moment, but she also knew the cub needed time to recover from his ordeal. But the most shocking part was still to come. As the cub's strength returned and he began to look around more alertly, Sarah heard it, the deep, grumbling call of an adult grizzly. The mother was looking for her baby. Sarah's blood turned to ice. This was the moment of truth. She gently set the cub down, expecting him to run toward his mother's call. But he didn't run. Instead, the little grizzly did something that would make headlines in wildlife journals around the world. The cub looked at Sarah, then toward the sound of his mother's call, then back at Sarah. For a moment that seemed to last forever, he hesitated, torn between the human who had saved his life and the bear who had given it to him. Then, with what Sarah swears was a look of gratitude, the cub gently touched her hand with his paw. It lasted only a second, but in that touch was something profound, a moment of pure connection that transcended species, fear, and instinct. The mother's call came again, closer this time. The cub finally responded, running toward the sound on unsteady legs. Sarah watched him go, her heart breaking and soaring at the same time. She was gathering her things, preparing to leave the area quickly, when she heard rustling in the bushes behind her. Sarah turned slowly, and there, not 30 feet away, stood the mother grizzly. 400 pounds of protective fury, scanning the area where her cub's scent was strongest, where the smell of human lingered in the air. Sarah didn't move, didn't breathe. This was it. The mother grizzly looked directly at her. For what felt like an eternity, human and bear regarded each other across the clearing. Then the cub appeared, running to his mother on legs that were finally steady. The reunion was everything you'd expect, nuzzling, checking for injuries, the universal language of a parent's relief. But before they left, something extraordinary happened. The mother grizzly looked at Sarah one last time. And then, wildlife experts still debate whether this actually happened, the massive bear seemed to nod. Just once, a slight movement of her great head. And then they were gone, disappearing into the forest like the wild creatures they were meant to be. Sarah made it back to the trailhead just as park rangers were beginning to organize a search party. When she told her story, many didn't believe her. Bears don't behave that way. Wild animals don't show gratitude. Mothers don't acknowledge human help. But 3 weeks later, a wildlife camera captured something that silenced all the skeptics. The same mother and cub, healthy and thriving, were photographed at a salmon run 20 miles upstream. The cub had not only survived his ordeal, but was growing strong under his mother's care. Sarah returned to her job at the hospital, but she was changed. She'd experienced something that reminded her why she became a healer in the first place, that life is precious, whether human or animal, and that sometimes the greatest risk is not trying at all. Today, Sarah volunteers with wildlife rehabilitation centers across Idaho. She tells her story not to encourage people to interfere with wild animals. That's still dangerous and usually illegal. But to remind us that we share this planet with creatures capable of emotions and connections we're only beginning to understand. The cub she saved that day would be fully grown now, living somewhere in the wilderness of central Idaho. She'll never see him again, and that's as it should be. But somewhere in those mountains, a wild grizzly bear learned that not all humans are threats, and a human
learned that the bonds of life transcend every boundary we think exists. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of the good in this world. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of human and animal connections that will restore your faith in the power of compassion. And remember, while we should always respect wildlife and maintain safe distances, we can still be guardians of the natural world through supporting conservation efforts, respecting animal habitats, and choosing compassion over fear. Because sometimes, in the space between heartbeats, between human and wild, miracles still happen. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.